A guten Erev Shabbos. Once upon a time, when someone had something bad to say about the Jews, they would have a hard time. They'd be hard-pressed to articulate it. They tried their best, but it came out as blessings rather than curses. That was then, in Parshas Balak, to be precise, our portion for this week. There may be other instances of this in Jewish history. I couldn't think of many. Nowadays, those who wish to speak poorly of us have certainly upped their game, to say the least. And from what we're able to gather, if you listen to the news a little bit or what passes for news on the internet, no one has any problem these days at all saying bad things about the Jews. This summer, to our sorrow, we found out who our friends are, and there aren't as many as we would have liked to think. All over the internet, in the halls of the UN and the American Congress, the European Union, and of course Israel's neighbors throughout the Middle East had terrible things to say about Israel and its national project of simply protecting its own. The government and its head were talked about in terms usually reserved for Stalinist dictators and strongmen who tend to execute their political critics. To make matters worse, to really add insult to injury, we found many Jews, and the younger they were, the more vocal they were in expressing their critiques of Israel. Well, on some planet somewhere, it's possible to have a thoughtful critique of the Jewish state without questioning its very right to existence. Somewhere in the universe, it might be possible to distinguish between the Jewish state and the Jewish people. But here on the earth that we live on, there's little evidence of these possibilities. Synagogues were attacked around the world, spray-painted with swastikas, had their windows smashed. Jews on the streets in major cities were attacked and beaten, to our collective sorrow. Once people get worked up, they tend to pay less attention to fine distinctions, like, for example, the difference between Israel Defense Forces and a Jew with a yarmulke sitting in a cafe in Los Angeles eating a sandwich. Somehow all of us wind up implicated in this. There's little comfort in knowing that this is really nothing new, that we're seeing once again something that has always been a problem and has really never gone away. Anti-Semitism, or let's call it what it is, Jew hatred. Thankfully, I've never been beaten up in public for being a Jew. I've been spat at and mocked and cursed and had pennies thrown at me and other very minor insults that you've probably experienced the same or worse. But tell me, does it make any sense to ask someone who's attacking you, "Pardon me, sir, I'm just curious, are you about to beat me up because you disagree with Israel's policies toward the Palestinians, or simply because you don't like Jews?" If it makes any difference to me, I doubt it makes very much difference to them. It's an old story, and in this week's Parshas Balak, we can read really an in-depth study of this long-standing problem. I want us to pay attention to something that's a little harder to notice about Parshas Balak, and that's not just what's there, but also what is not there. That may give us some interesting insight into this question of anti-Semitism or Jew hatred from which Balak suffered, although he was far from the last man in history to endure this malady. What is in the Parsha? Well, at the beginning, a Moabite king named Balak ben Zippor gives the Parsha its name. He looks at the Jews, and he and his people are at once frightened and appalled. What they're so appalled at is not really made clear. He tells the locals that the Jews are going to come and take everything, and he engages this fellow named Bilam, who happens to have the gift of prophecy, to curse the Jewish nation so that it will weaken the Jews and make us vulnerable. There's a lot of haggling back and forth over hiring this guy, but they reach an agreement. And on Bilam's way to confer with the Moabites, his donkey sees an angel of God in the path and stops. It's noteworthy that the donkey sees and the prophet Bilam does not see this angel. So Bilam smacks the donkey a number of times, and she turns around to him and says, "What have I done to you to make you hit me like this?" Then God opens his eyes and he sees the angel, and he's chastised a little bit. Bilam goes to visit Balak, and they agree that Bilam's going to curse the Jewish people, but somehow, whenever he climbs up to a high spot where he can see the whole Israelite camp, or part of it, all that comes out of his mouth is blessings, not curses, as was the plan. This happens several times with several variations. That's the parsha. The tail end of the parsha is the Moabites' frustrated attempt to weaken Bnei Yisrael by sending their daughters to tempt the Jews. Now, that's what's in the parsha. What is not there? What's missing in the parsha of Balak? The Jews, as actors, are by and large absent. The entire narrative of Balak hiring Bilam, the incident with the donkey, the plans, the schemes, the curses which become blessings, all of this takes place with the Jews off stage. It's a completely different scene. If you were filming it as a movie, the action would shift from Bnei Yisrael, who are pretty much the focus of every other parsha in Chumash. You'd have to move the cameras now. You'd have to shift scenes to film Balak and Bilam hatching their schemes to curse Bnei Yisrael. Then you'd pan to a shot of Bilam looking over the Jewish encampment. For almost all the entire parsha, the Jews are off stage. We're not party to what's going on here, and I think that makes a key point. We'll note that we're not completely absent from the parsha. The last half of the last aliyah, 9 verses in all, recount the after effects of these cruel designs on the Jewish people. The incident with the Moabite women that brought about Pinchas' zealous actions and leads us into the next parsha. But for the entire first 95 out of 104 verses of this portion, Bnei Yisrael are just not part of the action. We're not there. What could that possibly be suggesting to us? Let me suggest one reading to you. You know the names Albert Sabin, you've heard of Paul Ehrlich, maybe you even heard of a Nobel laureate called Gertrude Elion, who pioneered therapies for AIDS. These people cured polio, cured syphilis. When the Jewish people are not busy writing and celebrating books that give the world the ideas of God, morality, and justice, you'll often find us in medical schools, pioneering life-saving treatments for disease and developing techniques for healing. We're not even getting into a conversation about Dr. Albert Bourla, a Jew from Greece who's the CEO of a company whose name I promise you've uttered at least once in the past year, Pfizer, or his chief medical officer, Mikael Dolstein, who's a Jew from Sweden. Or may as well mention the competition. Medical chief at Moderna is Tal Zaks. I'm sure you read about him. There are many fields in which Jews are represented disproportionately, and I think it's fair to say medicine is one of them. But there's one sickness that Jews have not, and I believe will not, find the cure to, and that is anti-Semitism. Jew hatred goes back almost as far as the Jews, so it's going to be a real challenge to root out the historical causes of this long-standing sickness, this plague that seems to be woven into the DNA of humankind. In our parsha this week, it's maybe jealousy, maybe envy, all the emotions that take over and sadly mutate into this awful plague that's followed us for millennia and doesn't seem to have any cure in sight. It's not for want of trying. We have set up interfaith councils and anti-defamation leagues and Jewish congresses and B'nai B'riths and Simon Wiesenthal centers. If the cure for anti-Semitism were to be found in institutions and organizations, we would have found it by now. What I want to suggest, and I'm more than ready to hear your argument to the contrary, is that Jews will not be able to cure anti-Semitism because it's not a Jewish problem. It's simply not our problem. We are certainly the victims of it. We certainly suffer from it and have for millennia. But the actual blight on the soul called anti-Semitism is not one that we carry in our genes. So try as we might, we alone are not going to eradicate it. Those who are afflicted with it must seek a cure. And the first step towards finding a cure is admitting that you have a sickness to begin with. It could be that among the many things this week's portion is teaching us is that we don't have a role to play in anti-Semitism other than its objects. Again, for the first 95 out of 104 verses, where the dark plans of our enemies unfold and are ultimately foiled, we have no part, no speaking part. We don't appear on stage. We're not even there when the parsha takes place. The reason for Balak's enmity is not that we speak the language too well or that we don't speak it well enough. It's not that we run the government or the banks or that we don't take part in the government. Balak doesn't resent us for being too far to the left of the political spectrum or too far to the right. He's not upset that we dress differently or we dress the same and try to assimilate. In short, there's nothing we do that provokes the hatred. It's the mere fact of our existence. The very fact that we are is what lies behind Balak's hatred and Bilam's task of cursing. Perhaps this relieves us of the fool's errand that if we just change something about ourselves or our behavior, or that of other Jews somewhere, anywhere, that will alleviate the problem. We're just being who we are in all our human glory and imperfection. The problem of Jew hatred, as this parsha strongly suggests in this reading, really has nothing to do with the Jews. If we take that lesson to heart, perhaps we can go about our Jewish lives with a greater measure of purpose and dedication. We'll stop apologizing for eating kosher, for taking Saturday and holidays off from work and email and Zoom. We'll stop feeling bad that many of our number have chosen to establish a homeland that all of us may call home if we wish, and they must from time to time take strong measures to defend it from those who intend to harm it. In all this, we can still take not only comfort, but also strength and inspiration, because remember that the plan that Bilam and Balak crafted to curse us wound up being expressed ultimately as blessings. There's a much larger conversation to be had about free will and divine providence. For now, suffice it to say that whatever the nations and kingdoms of the world have wished for us, we have endured, we have remained strong and resilient through all kinds of travail. Of those curses become blessings that we mentioned before that Bilam wound up pronouncing, some of them have even wound up in our daily prayers, and no fewer than about a half dozen appear in a song that we sing together, Motzei Shabbos, right after Havdalah, Amar Hashem LiYaakov. If you haven't zoomed in to our beautiful online Havdalah, you're more than welcome to. We'd be glad to see you. One of those verses from this parsha, Darach Kochav mi Yaakov, a star will go forth from Yaakov, was explained by Rabbi Akiva to indicate his star choice, Bar Kochba. However, the Or HaChaim explained centuries later that both sides of the equation work in our favor. If Israel merits redemption on our own efforts, then the redemption will be revealed like a star, a Kochav mi Yaakov. And if not, then leaders will emerge in the normal natural progression of things, the Derech HaOlam, as it were. Either way, we look forward to a time when hatred against Jews, indeed enmity among all peoples, vanishes from the earth like a defeated plague, and an era of peace and true coexistence endures. Shabbat Shalom.